At 6:17 a.m., Nora Vale was already awake, staring at the ceiling like it was a spreadsheet she couldn't balance. Her phone lay face down on the nightstand. Not because she feared a call, because she feared the silence after. When she finally flipped it over, she didn't see a missed call from her mom. Or a text from a friend. She saw a subject line that had her name in it. Urgent. Misuse of funds, Nora Vale approval trail. It came from the company's general counsel. Nora sat up so fast her shoulder popped. She opened it, with the same instinct you open an elevator door. When you smell smoke, you already know it's bad, but you need to see how bad. There were attachments, screenshots, a chain of approvals. And at the center of it, like a nail hammered into her reputation, a forwarded email, allegedly sent by Nora, authorizing a vendor payment that should never have been authorized. The email read clean. Too clean. It used her signature. It used her role title. It used her tone. And it ended with a sentence she would never write. Let's keep this moving. No need to involve finance. Nora stared at that line until the words blurred. Not because she was confused. Because she was certain. She hadn't sent it. She hadn't even spoken to the vendor in 3 months. She scrolled down and saw the next message in the thread. A reply from her boss, Trevor Keane, written with fake relief. Thanks, Nora. You're a lifesaver. She felt something cold move through her ribs. Not fear. Recognition. Because she'd seen this before, not the exact trick, but the pattern. A mistake becomes a rumor. A rumor becomes a story. A story becomes a scapegoat. And scapegoats don't get to defend themselves. They get handled. At 6:41 a.m., Nora got a calendar invite that was already marked mandatory. 7:30 a.m., conference room. 19B, attendance required. No agenda. No notes. Just a time and a room. The kind of meeting that wasn't about truth. It was about choreography. She showered without music. She dressed without thinking. Black slacks, white blouse, hair pinned back like a promise she wouldn't break. When she arrived at the office, the lobby was all marble and calm lies. The security guard didn't meet her eyes when he scanned her badge. In the elevator, a young analyst stood beside her, reading the same email chain on his phone, pretending not to. Nora watched the numbers climb. 18 floors of polished air. At 7:29 a.m., she arrived outside conference room 19B. The door was already closed. Not "we're ready," closed. "We were ready without you" closed. She pushed it open. Inside, the room was too bright. Not sunlight, bright fluorescent bright. The kind of light that makes people look guilty, even when they're innocent. Around the table sat General Counsel, HR Director, Finance Controller, and Trevor Keane, her boss, wearing a navy suit and an expression of practiced disappointment. Trevor didn't look angry. Anger is emotional. Anger implies you still care. He looked tidy, as if he'd cleaned up a mess and now wanted credit for the cleaning. Nora took a seat. No one offered her water. General Counsel began, voice soft as a pillow over a face. Thank you for coming in early, Nora. Nora said nothing. The counsel clicked a remote. A screen lit up. There it was again, that email. That sentence. No need to involve finance. The HR director folded her hands like she was praying for Nora's cooperation. Trevor leaned forward and said, "We need you to be honest." Honest. The word hit Nora like a slap delivered with a smile. The finance controller spoke next, voice tight. That vendor payment was routed under your approval credentials. We've got a compliance issue, potentially a legal issue. Nora's mouth tasted metallic. Not because she was panicking, because she was calculating. She said carefully, "I did not send that email." Trevor exhaled a theatrical sigh and looked at the others like, "See? This is hard for her." General Counsel nodded, as if Nora had said something expected. "We understand that's your position," he said, "but the documentation suggests otherwise." Documentation. That's how they kill you. Not with a knife, with paper. Nora looked at the screen and noticed something she couldn't unsee. The email formatting was slightly off. The spacing between her name and title. The timestamp. The routing path. Small things, like fingerprints on glass. Trevor turned to her, voice warming. "If this was a mistake, Nora, we can protect you. But we can't protect you if you keep denying." Protect. Another word that means the opposite in corporate language. Nora stared at him. She remembered the night 2 months ago, when Trevor had patted her shoulder at 9:12 p.m. and said, "You're the backbone of this operation." Backbone. You only notice it when someone wants to break it. Nora's hands were still on her lap. Calm. Still. Then she asked, "Can I see the raw headers of that email?" The room paused. A microscopic pause, but she felt it. General Counsel blinked. The. Nora nodded. The routing data. I want to verify origin IP, send server, authentication passes, DKIM, SPF. Trevor's smile twitched. HR looked confused. Finance looked annoyed. General Counsel said, "That level of detail isn't necessary." Nora's voice stayed even. "It is, if you're accusing me." Another pause. Trevor leaned back, and now his disappointment sharpened. "Nora," he said, "we're trying to keep this internal." There it was. Internal. Meaning, keep it quiet, keep it cheap, keep it convenient. Nora felt her pulse. Not racing, focusing. She realized the meeting wasn't about learning what happened. They already knew. Or worse, they didn't care. They needed a name to pin it to. A clean name. A competent name. A name people would believe. And Nora's name was perfect because she wasn't political. She wasn't loud. She wasn't connected. She was the kind of person who does the work and assumes the work will protect her. But she'd been wrong. Trevor stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and said the line that ends careers. "We're placing you on administrative leave effective immediately." HR slid a folder toward her like it was a condolence card. Nora didn't touch it. She asked, "Is my access being revoked right now?" General Counsel said, "Yes." Nora nodded once. Not in acceptance. In acknowledgement. Because if her access was revoked, then she had minutes, not hours, to preserve what mattered. Trevor spoke softly, almost kindly. "If you cooperate, we can make this easier." Nora looked at him, and for the first time in that room, she let her eyes show exactly what she felt. Not rage, not tears. Just a cold, steady clarity that made Trevor's smile finally die. She said, "I will cooperate with the truth." And then she stood up. She didn't beg. She didn't bargain. She walked out with her dignity intact, while behind her, the room exhaled in relief. The relief of people who think they just buried a problem. In the hallway, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed in your lane." Nora stared at the message. At 7:58 a.m., she stepped into the elevator. And in the reflection of the mirrored walls, she saw her face under fluorescent light. Still, composed, but different now, because something in her had quietly clicked into place. If they wanted to turn her into a villain, she would become something worse. She would become a mirror, and she would hold it up until everyone saw themselves. The elevator doors closed, and Nora Vale began her payback without saying a single threatening word. At 8:06 a.m., Nora's badge stopped working. The little red light on the reader blinked like a heartbeat that had decided to quit. Security didn't say, "We're sorry." They said, "Company policy." A guard escorted her to her desk, not because she was dangerous, but because the company needed her to feel watched. The office floor was waking up, keyboards clicking, coffee machines hissing, people laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Nora walked past it all as if she was underwater. At her desk, she saw what Trevor had promised last week. A small, potted plant someone had placed beside her monitor. A cheap olive tree. A symbol of peace. Or a symbol of irony. The guard stood behind her while she packed. HR had told her she could take personal items only. Not files, not notes, not company property. As if her mind hadn't already become the most valuable storage device in that building. Nora slid her phone into her bag and opened a drawer. Inside was a notebook, plain black cover. No logo. She held it for a second. Then she left it. Not because it wasn't important. Because it was too important. The guard watched her hands. So she kept her hands simple. Water bottle, jacket, keys. And then she did one thing that looked harmless. She unplugged her laptop charger. But as her fingers brushed the cable, she noticed a small USB security key attached to it, one she hadn't put there. Her throat tightened. Someone had been at her desk. Not to steal, to plant. She didn't react. She didn't flinch. She simply left it hanging and walked away, as if she hadn't seen it, because reacting would confirm it mattered. And Nora was learning in real time. In the corporate world, the first person to look scared is the first person to lose. At the elevator bank, Trevor appeared like he'd been waiting for his scene. He approached with that calm confidence men get when they think the room belongs to them. "Nora," he said, voice low. "Let's talk." Nora looked at him. "We already did." Trevor smiled friendly, rehearsed. "I don't want this to get messy." Nora's eyes stayed on his. "Then you should have told the truth." Trevor's smile thinned. "Watch your tone." There it was. The real Trevor. Not the mentor. Not the team leader. The man who believed respect was something other people owed him. Nora leaned slightly closer, just enough to make him uncomfortable. And she whispered, "I'm not the one who should be worried about tone." Trevor's eyes narrowed. "You think you can fight this?" Nora pressed the elevator button. Ding. She stepped inside. Before the doors closed, she said, "I'm not going to fight. I'm going to document." The doors slid shut, leaving Trevor staring at his own reflection in the glass. At 8:23 a.m., Nora sat in her car in the parking garage and did something she hadn't done in years. She cried. But it wasn't loud. It was the kind of crying that happens when your body releases what your mind refuses to carry. It lasted exactly 45 seconds. Then she wiped her face, took one deep breath, and opened her notes app. She typed a title, "The Keen Pattern." Because this wasn't random. It was a pattern. Trevor didn't just throw people under the bus. He built the bus route first. Nora started listing what she knew. The vendor. Helix Bridge Consulting. The payment. Unusually fast approval. Unusual routing. The project. Aurora Migration. Trevor's flagship initiative. The lie. An email. From Nora telling finance to stay out. She stared at the words. And then, a memory surfaced with brutal clarity. 3 weeks ago, at 4:19 p.m., she had walked into the print room and overheard Trevor talking to someone from finance. Trevor's voice had been light, joking, but his sentence had been sharp. "Don't worry about Nora. She signs what I tell her to sign." Nora had frozen behind the door, unseen. She had told herself she misheard. Now she understood. She hadn't. At 9:02 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number again. Nora answered without speaking. A woman's voice, quiet and shaken. "This is Marisol. From Accounts Payable." Nora's heart tightened. "Marisol, are you okay?" A pause. Marisol whispered, "They're saying you approved Helix Bridge." Nora's jaw clenched. "I didn't." "I know," Marisol said quickly, like she needed Nora to say it so she could breathe. "Because I processed the invoice. And the approval didn't come through the normal workflow." Nora's body went still. "What do you mean?" Marisol exhaled. It came as a forwarded message. Not a system approval. Like someone wanted a paper trail without the audit trail. Nora closed her eyes. That's what forged emails are for. Not to convince experts. To convince managers who don't want to ask questions. Nora said softly, "Marisol, did you keep anything?" Marisol's voice shook. "I took screenshots. I know I shouldn't have. But something felt wrong." Nora's throat tightened. "You did the right thing." Marisol whispered. "Trevor's been pressuring us, and he said if we ever spoke to you, we'd be next." Nora stared at the concrete pillar in front of her parking spot. A cold clarity spread through her chest. This wasn't just about blaming her. This was about intimidating everyone else into silence. Nora said, "Marisol, listen carefully. Don't email me. Don't text me details. If they're monitoring, they'll use it against you." Marisol swallowed. "Then, how?" Nora cut in gently. "We'll do it the right way. Off the record. And when it's time, we'll put it on the record." Marisol whispered, "What are you going to do?" Nora looked at her own reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were red, but steady. She said, "I'm going to give them exactly what they asked for." A pause. Marisol said, "What?" Nora replied, "A trail." At 9:27 a.m., Nora opened her laptop at home. Not her company laptop. Her own. She logged into her personal email and searched one term. Helix Bridge. Nothing. Then she searched. Aurora Migration. Nothing. Of course. The company kept the real story inside company systems, and Nora's access was gone. So she did what people do when the front door is locked. She looked for the window. She opened LinkedIn and searched Helix Bridge employees. She found a name she recognized, a mid-level consultant who always smiled too much in meetings. Nora didn't message him. Not yet. Instead, she opened a folder on her desktop and labeled it Exhibit A. Then she created subfolders: timeline, communications, witnesses, financials, motive, contradictions. It looked like a legal case, because it was becoming one. At 10:11 a.m., her email pinged again, not from the company, from a personal address she didn't recognize. Subject line: You're not the only one. Nora hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single sentence. If you want to know how Trevor really works, meet me at 7:10 p.m. at LARK and Vine, booth in the back. No name, no signature, just the invitation. Nora stared at the screen. She should have been afraid, but she wasn't. Because fear lives in uncertainty. And for the first time since 6:17 a.m., Nora felt something else taking its place. Direction. She closed her laptop, stood up, and walked to her kitchen sink. She poured a glass of water, drank it slowly, and in that simple, quiet act, she made a decision. She wasn't going to clear her name like a polite employee. She was going to expose a system that used people like tissues. And she was going to do it with the one thing Trevor couldn't bully: charm or outmaneuver. Evidence. At 10:42 a.m., Nora opened her notes app again and added a final line under the keen pattern. He thinks I'm alone. Then she typed, good, because the loneliest moment is when your enemy gets careless. And Nora Vale planned to let Trevor Keane feel safe, right up until the ground disappeared. At 6:58 p.m., Nora Vale arrived early, not because she was eager, because she never walked into unknown territory without first mapping the exits. Lark and Vine sat on a quiet corner, brick walls, warm lights, the kind of place executives like to pretend they were still human. Jazz hummed low enough to sound intimate, high enough to blur conversations. Nora chose a table near the back bar, angled toward the entrance. She ordered water, not wine. Tonight wasn't about relaxing. It was about listening. At 7:09 p.m., the door opened. Nora didn't look up right away. She listened instead. Footsteps, measured, hesitant. A shadow paused near her table. Then a voice. You came. Nora looked up. The woman standing there was older than she expected, mid-40s maybe. Sharp eyes, tired posture. The kind of face that had learned when to stop hoping for fairness. Sit, Nora said. The woman slid into the booth across from her. I didn't think you would, the woman admitted. Nora studied her. If someone tells me I'm not the only one, I assume they're either lying or desperate. The woman smiled thinly. I was both, once. She extended a hand. Dana Mitchell. Nora shook it. Nora Vale. Dana nodded. I know who you are. That didn't surprise Nora. Dana glanced around, then leaned in. I used to work under Trevor Keane, Dana said. Different company, different city. Same ending. Nora didn't interrupt. Dana continued, voice low. He builds heroes. Then he burns them. Nora felt a chill. How? Dana laughed once, without humor. By letting them do the work, then making sure their name is closest to the fire. Dana reached into her bag and slid her phone across the table. On the screen was a photo. An email thread. Not Nora's, Dana's. Different company, different project. Same sentence at the bottom. Let's keep this moving. No need to involve finance. Nora's breath slowed. Dana said, That's his signature move. Not written by him, written to sound like us. Nora's fingers tightened around the glass. He forges. Dana nodded. Emails, approvals. Sometimes he pressures IT to reconstruct access logs after the fact. Nora's eyes sharpened. How do you know? Dana swallowed. Because I was stupid enough to confront him. Nora waited. Dana's voice dropped. He told HR I'd mishandled vendor relations. I was escorted out within an hour. Nora asked softly, Did you fight it? Dana smiled, sad. I tried. But I didn't have what you have. Nora met her gaze. What do I have? Dana leaned in, voice barely above the jazz. Timing. Nora felt it click. Trevor wasn't panicking yet, which meant he was still sloppy. Dana continued. When I was fired, I thought it was just me. Then I heard from two others. Same pattern, same language, same excuse. Nora asked, why didn't anyone stop him? Dana looked at her. Because every company thinks they're special, and Trevor knows how to look indispensable. Until the damage is already done. The waiter came by. Dana waved him off. Nora said, I need specifics. Dana nodded. Then I need to know something first. She hesitated. Are you trying to save your job? Or burn his career? Nora didn't answer right away. She watched a couple at the bar laugh over wine. Normal life. Then she said, I don't want revenge. Dana raised an eyebrow. I want accountability, Nora continued. And I want him unable to do this again. Dana studied her, then nodded slowly. Good, she said. Because revenge makes noise. Accountability leaves records. Dana unlocked her phone and pulled up a folder. Inside were documents. Screenshots. Calendars. Internal memos. Dana said. Trevor always creates urgency. Artificial deadlines. Emergency approvals. He pushes vendors to bypass systems just this once. Nora murmured. And once becomes a habit. Dana nodded. Exactly. Exactly. Nora leaned back. Helix Bridge. Dana stiffened. You know them. They're central, Nora said. They got paid without proper workflow. Dana exhaled. Then he's accelerating. Nora asked, why now? Dana answered without hesitation. Because someone above him is asking questions. Nora's pulse quickened. About what? Dana said. Budget overruns. Quiet ones. Spread across departments so no single report looks alarming. Nora's mind raced. Trevor wasn't just cleaning a mistake. He was closing a window. Dana said, if you want to catch him, don't accuse him. Nora nodded. Document him. Dana smiled. Trap him. At 7:42 p.m., Dana slid one last thing across the table. A printed calendar screenshot. Highlighted. Tomorrow 11 a.m. vendor alignment call. Helix Bridge. Dana said. He'll push something through tomorrow. He always does when he feels pressure. Nora asked. How do you know he feels pressure? Dana's eyes hardened. Because he reached out to me last week. Nora's head snapped up. Why? Dana said quietly. He wanted to make sure I was still quiet. Nora absorbed that. Trevor wasn't as safe as he thought. Nora asked, what did you say? Dana smiled. I told him I'd moved on. Nora nodded. Good. Dana stood. If you're smart, you won't contact me again. Nora stood too. If I'm smart, I won't need to. They exchanged a look. Not friendship, not alliance. Recognition. Dana walked out first. Nora stayed. At 7:58 p.m., Nora opened her notes and added a new heading. Phase 1. Let him talk. She didn't need access to company systems. She needed Trevor to do what he always did. Rush. At 8:14 p.m., her phone buzzed. A message from Marisol. He scheduled an urgent alignment for tomorrow morning. Helix Bridge plus Trevor only. Finance excluded. Nora's lips curved, just slightly. At home, at 9:01 p.m., Nora set her laptop on the kitchen table. She opened a blank document and titled it, Affidavit Draft. Not because she was filing it yet, but because she was thinking like someone who would. She listed names, dates, times. She remembered Trevor's words. We're trying to keep this internal. Nora whispered to the empty room. No, you're trying to keep it invisible. At 9:36 p.m., she drafted an email. Not to send. To practice. Subject line. Clarification request approval authority. She imagined Trevor reading it. Imagined his irritation. His instinct to respond quickly. Emotionally. Carelessly. Nora deleted the draft. Tomorrow, she wouldn't email him. She would let him speak where it mattered more. On a recorded line. At 10:02 p.m., Nora lay in bed. Sleep didn't come easily. But clarity did. She wasn't chasing justice. She was letting gravity do its work. Because systems don't collapse from attacks. They collapse from exposure. and Trevor Keane was about to explain himself. In his own words, at 10:48 a.m., Trevor Keane closed his office door, not gently. With the confidence of someone who believed privacy was power, he loosened his tie, glanced at the wall clock, and smiled. 11 minutes. That was all he needed. Across town, Nora Vale sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, phone face down, hands folded like she was waiting for a verdict. She wasn't on the call. She didn't need to be. Because power doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to whoever controls the record. At 10:52 a.m., Marisol's message came through. Call starting early. Nora inhaled slowly. Earlier meant urgency. Urgency meant mistakes. Inside the conference room, Trevor dialed in. Helix Bridge. The screen flickered. 3 faces appeared. A senior consultant, a project coordinator, and a junior associate whose eyes kept darting to the corner of his screen. Trevor leaned back, all confidence. Let's move fast, he said. We're aligned, right? The senior consultant nodded. Of course, but finance hasn't. Trevor waved a hand. No need to involve finance, he said casually. That's already handled. Across the city, Nora's phone vibrated. Recording live. She didn't smile. She didn't move. She simply listened. Trevor continued, voice relaxed. We just need to keep momentum. The board hates delays. The junior associate hesitated. Shouldn't approvals? Trevor cut him off. I said it's covered, he snapped, then softened. Look, I'll take responsibility. Responsibility. The word floated in the air like a promise that would never be kept. Nora closed her eyes. Because Trevor was doing exactly what Dana said he would. Talking. At 10:56 a.m., the senior consultant asked, Do you want this routed through standard workflow? Trevor laughed. No, he said. That's how things get stuck. Send it to me directly. I'll forward approval. Forward? Not system. Forwarded emails don't leave fingerprints. They leave shadows. Nora's pulse slowed. This wasn't just evidence. This was a confession wrapped in confidence. At 10:59 a.m., Trevor glanced at the clock. Anything else? He asked. The junior associate shifted. Just to confirm, whose approval are we referencing for audit? Trevor sighed. Nora's, he said, without hesitation. She's already signed off. Silence. Not dramatic silence. Administrative silence. The kind that becomes deadly later. Nora's jaw tightened. Trevor added, She's on leave, so don't bother her. I'll handle questions. Handle. Another word that meant bury. At 11:02 a.m., the call ended. Trevor stood, satisfied. He didn't know that the junior associate had been instructed quietly to record all vendor calls after a process review. He didn't know Marisol had escalated that instruction 2 weeks ago. And he didn't know that the file had already been saved, duplicated, and timestamped. At 11:07 a.m., Nora's phone buzzed again. File secured. Multiple backups. Nora exhaled for the first time in minutes. But relief was dangerous. Because this wasn't over. Evidence without leverage is just information. And Trevor still believed he controlled the narrative. At 11:19 a.m., Nora did something unexpected. She emailed HR. From her personal account. Subject line. Formal request, written clarification of allegations. Short. Polite. Controlled. No accusations. Just a request. She knew what would happen next. At 11:31 a.m., Trevor got the notification. He frowned. He hadn't expected her to move. Because he believed silence meant submission. He forwarded the email to General Counsel. Added a note. She's getting difficult. Difficult. The label they give you when obedience stops working. At 12:04 p.m., HR replied to Nora. Corporate language. Soft edges. We are reviewing your request. Nora read it once. Then she forwarded it not to a lawyer. To herself. Because everything now was about building a clean line. At 2:22 p.m., Dana texted. Did he talk? Nora replied. He sang. At 12:47 p.m., Trevor called Marisol. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Hey, just checking in. Need you to pull the payment logs for Helix Bridge. As soon as possible. His voice was calm. Too calm. Marisol stared at her phone, heart pounding. Then she forwarded the voicemail. Nora listened to it twice. Not for what he said. For what he didn't. He didn't mention Nora. He didn't mention compliance. Because he believed the story was contained. At 1:18 p.m., Nora opened a new folder. Exhibit B audio. She added timestamps. Quotas. Context. She imagined a compliance officer listening. Imagined the pause. The note-taking. The shift in posture. Because Trevor hadn't broken a rule accidentally. He'd bypassed it deliberately. At 2:03 p.m., Nora received another message. Unknown number. Careful. He's nervous. She didn't respond. Nervous people rush. Rushed people make mistakes. At 3:14 p.m., Trevor sent an internal message. Company-wide. Reminder. All external communications must follow protocol. It was framed as leadership. It was actually fear. Nora smiled just once. At 4:02 p.m., she drafted another document. Title. Chronology of events. Independent account. She wrote like she was invisible. Factual. Neutral. Precise. No emotion. Emotion weakens testimony. At 5:21 p.m., Dana called. You got what you needed, Dana said. Nora answered. I got what he gave me. Dana was silent for a moment. Then, what's your move? Nora looked out the window as the city dimmed. She said, I wait. Dana exhaled. That's dangerous. Nora replied, so is panicking. At 6:08 p.m., Trevor sent one last email that day. To General Counsel. We may need to formalize termination soon. Soon. Before questions spread. Before records surfaced. Before silence broke. Nora read the forwarded screenshot Marisol sent her. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She simply added a final line to her notes. He's accelerating. And beneath it, so am I. At 6:42 p.m., Nora shut her laptop. She didn't celebrate. She didn't relax. Because the most dangerous moment in any power shift is when the other side realizes the ground is moving. And Trevor Keane was about to feel it. Not as an attack, but as a loss of control. At 8:32 a.m., the compliance inbox received a message it couldn't ignore. Not because it was loud, but because it was precise. Subject line. Request for independent review approval authority and vendor routing. No accusations. No emotional language. Just a timeline. Dates. Times. Names. And one line at the bottom that changed everything. Supporting materials available upon request. Nora Vale sent it, closed her laptop, and went to make coffee. She didn't pace. She didn't refresh her inbox. Because she understood something Trevor didn't. Compliance doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to clarity. At 9:11 a.m., Trevor Keane was mid-sentence in a leadership sync when his assistant knocked. Twice. Hard. Trevor frowned. I'm in a meeting. The assistant stepped in anyway. Face pale. Compliance is asking for you. The room stilled. Not silence. Suspension. Trevor smiled, quick and charming. Tell them I'll call back. The assistant swallowed. They're already here. Trevor's smile froze. Down the hall, two people waited. No sweets. No smiles. Just folders. The compliance officer introduced herself without ceremony. We're conducting a preliminary inquiry, she said. We need 15 minutes. Trevor nodded. Of course. Happy to help. Help. Another word that meant delay. They entered a small room. No windows. No glass walls. No audience. The compliance officer placed a recorder on the table. Red light blinking. Trevor glanced at it. That won't be necessary, he said lightly. It is, she replied. Trevor adjusted his chair. He still believed this was manageable. At 9:24 a.m., the first question came. Can you describe your approval authority regarding vendor payments? Trevor spoke smoothly. Final approvals, route through finance, but project leads. She interrupted gently. That wasn't the question. Trevor paused. She repeated. Your authority. Trevor said. I don't have unilateral approval. The officer nodded and wrote something down. At 9:27 a.m., she asked. Have you ever instructed a vendor to bypass standard workflow? Trevor laughed. Absolutely not. She looked up. Never? Never. He said. At 9:31 a.m., she slid a printed transcript across the table. Highlighted. Trevor glanced down. His jaw tightened. The line was unmistakable. No need to involve finance. His voice. Time-stamped. Trevor leaned back. That's taken out of context. The officer didn't argue. She asked, what context would make that appropriate? Trevor opened his mouth, closed it. Context only works when it exists. At 9:36 a.m., the officer asked, did you represent Nora Vale's approval during that call? Trevor hesitated. Just half a second too long. She was the project owner, he said. Her approval was implied. The officer wrote again. Implied approvals, she said slowly, are not recognized under policy. Trevor nodded. Of course. But his voice had lost its ease. At 9:41 a.m., she asked, why was Miss Vale placed on administrative leave before this call? Trevor said, ongoing investigation. The officer looked up. Which investigation? Trevor blinked. The one involving the approval you referenced, she finished. Trevor stared. That wasn't supposed to happen. At 9:47 a.m., she closed her folder. We'll need full access to your communications, she said. Email, messaging platforms, calendars. Trevor forced a smile. That seems extensive, she replied evenly. So is potential misconduct. At 10:02 a.m., Trevor walked back to his office. The walls felt closer. His phone buzzed. A message from General Counsel. What's happening? Trevor typed. Routine. Under control. It wasn't. At 10:19 a.m., Compliance emailed Finance. Subject. Immediate preservation. Notice Helix Bridge transactions. Finance froze everything. Invoices. Logs. Approvals. The system stopped moving. Trevor noticed when a vendor pinged him. Payment delayed. Any update? Trevor stared at the screen. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. At 10:47 a.m., Nora received a reply from Compliance. Short, professional. Thank you, we will be in touch. Nora read it once. She didn't celebrate. Because silence from Compliance wasn't absence. It was digestion. At 11:26 a.m., Trevor called HR. We need to finalize Nora's termination today, he said. HR hesitated. Compliance requested a hold. Trevor's voice sharpened. On whose authority? HR said quietly. The board's. The word landed like a dropped plate. Board. Trevor ended the call without another word. At 12:08 p.m., the compliance officer emailed again. To Trevor. CC, General Counsel. Please clarify the basis for referencing Miss Vale's approval while her access was revoked. Trevor stared at the message. There was no good answer. At 12:41 p.m., he drafted a response. Deleted it. Drafted another. Deleted that too. Every explanation contradicted something already on record. At 1:13 p.m., Nora received a call. Unknown number. She answered. This is Compliance, the voice said. We'd like to speak with you. Nora replied calmly. Of course. At 1:42 p.m., she joined the call. She spoke slowly, factually. No blame. No speculation. Just what she knew, what she didn't, and what she could prove. When asked about motive, she said, I don't speculate. That mattered. At 2:21 p.m., the compliance officer thanked her. We may reach out again. Nora replied, I'll be available. At 3:04 p.m., Trevor received another message. Do not contact witnesses. He laughed once, then stopped, because it wasn't a request. At Trey, Patrzeć, she shopped a p.m. Dana texted Nora. He's boxed in. Nora replied, No, he's documented. At 4:32 p.m., Compliance scheduled a board briefing. Not public. Confidential. Mandatory. Trevor wasn't invited to speak. He was invited to listen. At 5:18 p.m., Trevor sat alone in his office. Lights off. Phone in hand. He typed a message to Nora. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted that too. Because for the first time, he understood something terrifying. He wasn't controlling the story anymore. He was inside it. And stories, once recorded, don't care who used to run the room. At 8:57 a.m., the board assembled. No one raised their voice. No one checked their phone. That alone told Trevor Keane everything he needed to know. This wasn't a courtesy briefing. This was a reckoning. The room overlooked the city glass walls. Muted light. Long table polished so smooth it reflected faces back at themselves. Trevor sat halfway down the table. Not at the head. That seat was empty. The compliance officer stood instead. No slides yet. No drama. She spoke plainly. We are here to review a pattern of approval bypasses connected to Helix Bridge Consulting. Pattern. That word does damage. Trevor folded his hands. He smiled. Because he still believed he could talk his way through this. At 9:03 a.m., the first slide appeared. A timeline. Dates lined up like fingerprints. One board member leaned forward. Why was finance excluded repeatedly? She asked. Trevor answered quickly. Efficiency. The compliance officer clicked to the next slide. Audio transcript. Highlighted. No need to involve finance. The room didn't react. Which was worse than outrage. At 9:07 a.m., another board member asked, whose approval was represented? Trevor said, Nora Vales. The compliance officer spoke immediately after. At the time of this call, Miss Vales' access had been revoked. Silence. A board member frowned. Then how was her approval valid? Trevor shifted. It was implied. Based on prior. Another board member interrupted. Implied approvals are not policy. Trevor nodded. I understand that now. Now. Too late. At 9:12 a.m., the compliance officer changed slides. Email headers. Routing paths. Authentication failures. Forwarded approvals lack system verification, she said. They bypass audit controls. One board member leaned back. So this was intentional. Trevor smiled tightly. I wouldn't characterize it that way. The compliance officer didn't argue. She played the audio. Trevor's voice filled the room. Confident. Casual. Certain. I'll take responsibility. The phrase echoed. Responsibility. A board member turned to him. Then why did Miss Vale face termination? Trevor opened his mouth. Closed it. Because any answer created another contradiction. At 9:18 a.m., the compliance officer delivered the quietest blow. There are 3 additional cases. Different departments. Same language. She clicked. New timelines appeared. Different names. Same sentence. No need to involve finance. Trevor felt the temperature in the room drop. Because one incident can be explained. 3 becomes behavior. At 9:21 a.m., the chair finally spoke. Not loud. Not angry. Mr. Keene, she said. Do you believe these controls exist for convenience or protection? Trevor answered automatically. Protection. The chair nodded. Then explain why you repeatedly removed them. Trevor swallowed. This wasn't interrogation. This was dismantling. At 9:24 a.m., the compliance officer concluded. We recommend immediate action. The word recommend was a formality. At 9:26 a.m., the chair looked directly at Trevor. Step outside, please. Trevor stood. He didn't argue. He walked out under his own power. Which is how powerful people fall. In the hallway, Trevor stared at the city through glass. He texted General Counsel. I need support. No reply. Inside the room, the board voted. Unanimous. At 9:41 a.m., Trevor was called back in. The chair didn't waste time. Your role is terminated effective immediately. Trevor nodded. No protest. Because he understood something now. The record had spoken. At 9:43 a.m., the chair added. We will be notifying relevant authorities. That part hurt more. Because jobs can be replaced. Records follow. Trevor gathered his things. He looked smaller, leaving than he had entering. At 10:02 a.m., Nora Vale received a call. This is the chair, the voice said. We owe you an apology. Nora listened. The chair continued. Your termination is rescinded. Full reinstatement, effective immediately. Nora paused, then said, Thank you. The chair added, We would also like to discuss your future here. Nora replied calmly, So would I. At 10:27 a.m., company-wide email went out. Leadership update. No names mentioned. Just changes. But people read between lines. At 11:08 a.m., Marisol texted, He's gone. Nora closed her eyes. Not in triumph. In release. At 11:42 a.m., Dana sent one last message. You did what I couldn't. Nora replied, You helped me. At 12:19 p.m., Nora walked back into the building. This time, no escort. No red light. Her badge worked. People looked up. Some smiled. Some looked away. Truth makes people uncomfortable. At Toll. Suvoktradive p.m. Nora sat at her desk. The olive tree was still there. She touched a leaf. Then opened her laptop. At 1:04 p.m., an internal message arrived. From compliance. Thank you for your professionalism. Nora archived it. Because gratitude wasn't the point. Impact was. At 2:15 p.m., the chair met with her privately. We want you to take over operational integrity, she said. Nora listened. She didn't rush to answer. She said, I'll need authority. The chair nodded. You'll have it. At 3:02 p.m., Nora accepted. Not as revenge. As prevention. At 4:11 p.m., Nora updated her notes. Final line under the keen pattern. Exposure ends behavior. She closed the file. Because some stories don't end with applause. They end with systems working the way they should have all along. And that was the most satisfying outcome of all. At 7:18 a.m., the city woke up without knowing what it had narrowly avoided. Traffic moved. Coffee brewed. Emails loaded. And somewhere between routine and habit, a system quietly corrected itself. Nora Vale arrived early. Not because she needed to prove anything, but because she always had. The lobby felt different now. Not warmer. Clearer. No escort. No glances that lingered too long. Just space. At 7:31 a.m., Nora stepped into her new office. No corner view. No oversized desk. Just a door that closed properly, and a chair that didn't feel temporary. She set her bag down and stood still for a moment. Because endings don't feel like victory. They feel like quiet. At 8:04 a.m., compliance sent the final internal notice. Investigation concluded. Controls updated. No names. No explanations. Companies don't apologize. They adjust. At 8:19 a.m., Nora opened a new document. Title: Operational Integrity, Phase 1. She didn't start with rules. She started with questions. Where can urgency override process? Who benefits when visibility disappears? Which controls fail silently? She knew the danger now. Not malice. Momentum. At 9:12 a.m., HR requested a meeting. They spoke carefully. They used phrases like learning opportunity and organizational growth. Nora listened. Then said, if this is going to work, there can't be protected shortcuts. HR nodded. Because this time, agreement wasn't optional. At 10:03 a.m., Nora walked the floor. She didn't announce herself. She observed. People straightened when they saw her. Not from fear, from recognition. Because they knew she hadn't climbed over anyone. She'd stood still while others fell past her. At 11:27 a.m., Marisol knocked on her door. Hesitant. Nora smiled. Come in. Marisol exhaled. I just wanted to say, thank you. Nora shook her head gently. You told the truth. That matters. Marisol nodded, eyes wet. I didn't think it would. Nora replied, it always does. It just takes time. At 12:41 p.m., Nora took her lunch outside. No calls. No emails. Just air. She watched people pass. She thought about Trevor Keane. Not with anger. With distance. At 1:22 p.m., a news alert crossed her phone. Former tech executive, under regulatory review. No name mentioned. But she knew. Records have a way of finding light. At 2:09 p.m., Dana sent a final message. Looks like he won't be doing this again. Nora typed back. That was the goal. Dana replied. You didn't just win. You changed the terrain. Nora stared at the words. Terrain. That felt right. At 3:34 p.m., the board chair stopped by. Brief. Unannounced. We made a mistake, she said plainly. Nora nodded. The chair continued. You handled it correctly. Nora replied. I handled it carefully. The chair smiled. That's rarer. At 4:16 p.m., Nora locked her computer. She didn't stay late. She didn't need to. At 5:02 p.m., as she walked out, the olive tree caught her eye. Still alive. Still quiet. She picked it up. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. At 6:11 p.m., Nora sat in her apartment as the city dimmed. She poured a glass of water, held it, thought about the email that never existed, the sentence that tried to erase her. No need to involve finance. She smiled faintly. Because the most dangerous lies are the ones that sound efficient. At 7:03 p.m., she deleted the folder labeled The Keen Pattern, not out of forgiveness, out of closure, because justice doesn't need souvenirs. At 7:29 p.m., Nora wrote one final line in her personal notes. Silence isn't weakness. It's leverage, if you know when to speak. She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and for the first time in weeks, slept without replaying a single moment. Because some victories don't echo, they stabilize. And in the corporate world, that's the kind that lasts. They thought she would beg. They thought she would panic. They thought silence meant surrender. They were wrong. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the record. And when the truth finally spoke, it didn't shout. It stood.